The sterile smell of disinfectant, mixed with something else, something final, hung heavy in the air of room 304. Ethan sat motionless beside the hospital bed, his eyes fixed on the frail figure beneath the white sheets. His sister Charlotte had always been the strong one, the protector, the one who held the family together when everything fell apart. "Hey friends, welcome back to Grace Time with Auntie. I'm so happy to see you here. Tell me, which country are you watching from today? Grab your coffee, sit back, and let's dive into today's amazing story together." Now she looked so small, so fragile, her once vibrant face reduced to hollow cheeks and pale skin stretched tight over bones. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the silence, each beep a reminder that time was running out. Charlotte's eyes fluttered open, those same dark eyes that had comforted him through his darkest days 7 years ago, and now they held something else, something that looked like guilt. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible, cracking under the weight of whatever burden she'd been carrying. He leaned closer, taking her cold hand in his, feeling how papery her skin had become. "I'm here, Charlotte. Save your strength." But she shook her head weakly, and a single tear rolled down her temple. "No, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." Her words sent an inexplicable chill down his spine. "Before I die, you need to know the truth about Olivia, about the baby, about everything." Ethan's body went rigid. Olivia. That name still had the power to tear open old wounds he thought had healed. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 7 years, had trained himself not to think about her, about what she did, about the betrayal that shattered his world. "Charlotte, please, we don't need to," he started, but she gripped his hand with surprising strength. "We do. God forgive me. We do." Her breathing became labored, and the monitor's beeping increased slightly. "What I did to you, what I did to her, to that innocent child, I can't die with this secret." Ethan felt his throat tighten. What was she talking about? What child? The child that wasn't his? The product of Olivia's affair that she tried to pass off as his own? "The baby wasn't from an affair, Ethan," Charlotte said, as if reading his thoughts, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. "The baby was yours, always yours." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Ethan pulled his hand away, standing abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What are you talking about? I saw the messages. I saw the proof. You were there, you helped me through it, I created it," Charlotte interrupted, her voice stronger now, urgent, as if she needed to get this out before her body gave up entirely. "I created all of it. The messages, the evidence, everything. Olivia never cheated on you. She loved you more than anything in this world, and I destroyed it. I destroyed everything." The room spun. Ethan gripped the edge of the bed to steady himself, his mind racing back 7 years, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. It was impossible. It had to be the medication, the morphine talking, making her confused. But as he looked into Charlotte's eyes, he saw only clarity, painful, devastating clarity, and the truth of her confession reflected back at him like a mirror he didn't want to look into. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Why would you do that?" Charlotte's face crumpled, and she began to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. "Because I loved you, not as a sister should love a brother. I was sick, Ethan, sick in my mind and my heart. I watched you with her, so happy, planning your future, and something twisted inside me. When she got pregnant, I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't watch you build a life with her, have children with her, grow old with her." Ethan stumbled backward, his back hitting the wall. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. "You're lying. You have to be lying." "I wish I was," Charlotte sobbed. "I hacked her phone, created fake accounts, manufactured messages from a fictional lover. I was always good with technology, remember? You trusted me completely. When you found those messages and came to me, destroyed and broken, I played my part perfectly. I comforted you, encouraged you to leave her, even helped you find a divorce lawyer. I fed your anger, your hurt, made sure you wouldn't listen to her explanations. She tried to tell you the truth, tried to show you it was all fake, but I made sure you were too hurt to listen. The memories came flooding back with horrifying clarity. Olivia's face streaked with tears, begging him to believe her. "Ethan, please, I don't know who this person is. Someone is setting me up. The baby is yours, only yours. Please don't do this." He had turned away from her, his heart too shattered to hear anything but betrayal. And Charlotte had been there, always there, telling him he was making the right decision, that he deserved better, that Olivia was manipulating him. "After the divorce," Charlotte continued, her voice growing weaker, "you were so broken. I took care of you, and for a while, I had what I wanted. Your attention, your dependence on me. We crossed lines that should never have been crossed. You were vulnerable, I was manipulative, and She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Ethan remembered those confused, dark months after the divorce, the boundaries that blurred, the night that should never have happened. He had blamed himself, the grief, the alcohol, but now he understood it had all been part of her design. "Where is Olivia now?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Where is my child?" Charlotte's monitor started beeping erratically. "I don't know. I lost track of her after the first year. She tried to contact you so many times, sent letters, emails, even came to your office. I intercepted everything. Eventually, she stopped trying. The last I heard, she was struggling, alone, trying to raise your son on her own. Your son, Ethan. You have a 6-year-old son who thinks his father abandoned him." The world shattered into a million pieces. 7 years earlier, the world had been entirely different, painted in colors Ethan had almost forgotten existed. The memory hit him now like a physical blow as he stood in that hospital room, his sister's confession still echoing in his ears. He remembered that morning in March when everything was perfect, when his biggest worry was whether to surprise Olivia with breakfast in bed or take her to that little cafe she loved on Baker Street. They had been married for 3 years, and every single day felt like a gift he didn't deserve. Olivia was the kind of woman who made the ordinary extraordinary, who could turn a rainy Tuesday into an adventure, who laughed with her whole body and loved with her entire soul. That morning, she had been standing in their kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window and catching in her auburn hair, making it glow like copper wire. She was wearing his old university sweatshirt, the gray one with the coffee stain on the sleeve that she'd claimed as her own, and she was humming something off-key while making tea. Ethan had wrapped his arms around her from behind, breathing in the vanilla scent of her shampoo, and she'd turned in his embrace with that smile that still made his heart skip. "I have something to tell." "You," she'd said, her green eyes sparkling with barely contained excitement. He'd felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with slight concern because Olivia was terrible at keeping secrets, especially good ones, and the way she was practically vibrating with energy suggested this was something big. "You know how I've been feeling a bit off lately? Tired, queasy in the mornings?" He'd nodded, remembered the concern he'd felt, how he'd wanted her to see a doctor, but she'd insisted it was just stress from her new project at work. "Well, I did see a doctor yesterday," she continued, and pulled something from the pocket of the sweatshirt. It was a small white stick with 2 pink lines, and for a moment, Ethan's brain couldn't process what he was seeing. Then it hit him like a freight train, joy so pure and overwhelming that he actually felt tears spring to his eyes. "We're having a baby," Olivia whispered, and then she was crying too, laughing and crying at the same time. And they were holding each other in that sun-filled kitchen, their whole future spreading out before them like a beautiful, unwritten story. The next few weeks had been a blur of doctor's appointments, baby name books, and endless conversations about nursery colors and whether they should find out the gender or wait for a surprise. Charlotte had been thrilled too, or so he'd thought. She'd shown up at their flat with champagne for herself and sparkling cider for Olivia, had hugged them both, and said all the right things about being an aunt. Looking back now, with the bitter clarity of hindsight, Ethan could see the cracks in her performance, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders when she watched him kiss Olivia's still flat stomach, the way she'd volunteered to help with everything, inserting herself deeper and deeper into their lives. It had been Charlotte who'd suggested Olivia should get a new phone because her old one was acting up. Charlotte who'd recommended the best baby monitor apps and parenting forums. Charlotte who'd been there for every ultrasound appointment because she didn't want to miss a moment of her nephew's development. He'd thought it was sweet, thought his sister was just excited about becoming an aunt. He'd been so blind, so stupidly, tragically blind. The first message had appeared on a Tuesday evening in June. Ethan had been working late, finishing up a presentation for a client meeting the next morning, and Olivia had already gone to bed, exhausted from the pregnancy. Her phone had been charging on the kitchen counter, and it had lit up with a notification. Ethan hadn't meant to look, respected her privacy completely, but the preview of the message had been visible on the lock screen, and the words had burned themselves into his retinas instantly. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You're incredible. When can I see you again?" The sender's name was Marcus, accompanied by a heart emoji, and Ethan had felt the floor drop out from under him. His hands had been shaking as he'd picked up her phone, entered the passcode he knew because they'd never kept secrets from each other, or so he'd thought, and opened the messaging app. What he'd found had destroyed him. Months of conversations with this Marcus person, flirtatious messages that grew increasingly intimate, plans to meet up, expressions of desire and longing. There were gaps in the conversation, suggesting deleted messages, making him wonder what else she'd been hiding. One message from Marcus had said, "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything? You're taking a huge risk." And Olivia's response had been, "He trusts me completely. He'd never think to question anything." Those words had cut deeper than any blade. He'd scrolled back through the messages with trembling fingers, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. The affair, if that's what it was, seemed to have started around the time she'd gotten pregnant. The timing made him physically ill. Was the baby even his? The messages weren't explicitly sexual, but they were intimate enough, familiar enough, to suggest something physical had happened. There were references to our special place and that amazing afternoon, and enough coded language to paint a picture Ethan didn't want to see. He'd sat there in the dark kitchen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, his entire world crumbling around him, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. This couldn't be his Olivia, his wife, the woman who'd promised to love him forever. But it was her phone, her messages, her betrayal spelled out in blue and gray chat bubbles. He'd thought about confronting her right then, waking her up and demanding answers, but something had held him back. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe it was the desperate hope that there was some explanation, some way this could all make sense. Instead, he'd done what he always did when he was in crisis. He'd called Charlotte. She'd arrived within 20 minutes, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, concern etched across her face. Charlotte had always been his rock, 5 years older and infinitely wiser, or so he'd believed. When their parents had died in a car accident when Ethan was 19, Charlotte had been the one who held everything together, who made sure he finished university, who'd been there for every milestone and every crisis. He trusted her more than anyone in the world, which was exactly what she'd been counting on. "What's wrong?" she'd asked, taking in his devastated expression, and he'd handed her Olivia's phone without a word, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He'd watched Charlotte's face as she scrolled through the messages, watched her expression shift from confusion to shock to anger, and it had felt validating, confirming that he wasn't crazy, that what he was seeing was real. "Oh, Ethan," she'd said softly, setting the phone down and pulling him into a hug. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He'd broken down then, sobbing into his sister's shoulder like a child, and she'd held him and made soothing sounds and told him it would be okay, that she'd help him through this, that he wasn't alone. Looking back now, standing in that hospital room 7 years later, Ethan could see how perfectly she'd played her role, how every word had been calculated to deepen his pain and his dependence on her. "What do I do?" he'd asked when he finally pulled himself together. "How do I even confront her about this?" Charlotte had sat back, her expression thoughtful and sympathetic. "You need to be smart about this, Ethan. If you confront her right now, emotional and upset, she'll manipulate you. She'll have excuses ready, she'll turn it around on you, make you feel guilty for not trusting her. Women like her are experts at manipulation." The phrase, "women like her," should have been a red flag, but he'd been too destroyed to notice. "You need evidence," Charlotte had continued. "You need to document everything. Screenshot those messages, check phone records, see if you can find anything else. And you need to talk to a lawyer before you do anything. Protect yourself, protect your assets. If that baby isn't even yours, you don't want to be on the hook for child support." The suggestion that the baby might not be his had felt like another knife to the gut. But Charlotte's logic had made sense to his shattered mind. She'd been practical, protective, thinking about his future when he couldn't think past the next breath. "I know a lawyer," she'd offered. "Marcus Henley. He specializes in divorce cases. He's excellent, and he's discreet. Let me call him first thing in the morning. Set up a meeting. In the meantime, act normal. Don't let her know you've seen anything. We need to build a case." Ethan had nodded numbly, grateful for her clear thinking when his own mind was chaos. Charlotte had stayed with him that night, sleeping on the sofa, claiming she wanted to make sure he was okay. In reality, as he now understood, she'd been making sure he didn't talk to Olivia, didn't give his wife a chance to explain, didn't accidentally discover that the messages were fake. The next morning had been torture. Olivia had woken up cheerful and glowing, chattering about baby names and nursery themes, and Ethan had forced himself to smile and nod while his heart was breaking. She'd kissed him goodbye before leaving for work, told him she loved him, and he'd watched her go knowing, or thinking he knew, that she was heading off to betray him again. Charlotte had been true to her word. By noon, he'd had an appointment with Marcus Henley for that afternoon. The lawyer had been professional and sympathetic, had looked over the screenshots Charlotte had taken of the messages, and had nodded gravely. "This is fairly clear-cut," Henley had said. "With evidence of infidelity, you have grounds for a fault divorce. Given that your wife is pregnant and there's question about paternity, I'd recommend we move quickly. The longer you wait, the more complicated things become legally." Looking back now, Ethan realized that Henley had never once suggested verifying the messages, never questioned their authenticity, never recommended couples counseling or any attempt at reconciliation. Charlotte had chosen him specifically because he was the kind of lawyer who moved fast and asked few questions, who saw every divorce as a battle to be won rather than a tragedy to be possibly prevented. The confrontation had happened 3 days later. Ethan had spent those days gathering his courage, moving money into a separate account on Henley's advice, and drowning in his sister's poison disguised as support. Charlotte had been there constantly, feeding his anger, reminding him of the betrayal, making sure the wound stayed fresh and raw. When he'd finally confronted Olivia, he'd been a stranger to himself, cold and furious and completely certain of her guilt. She'd been sitting on their bed, folding baby clothes they'd bought the previous weekend, little onesies with ducks and elephants, and her face had lit up when he walked in. That light had died the moment she saw his expression. "Who's Marcus?" he'd demanded, his voice harsh and unfamiliar. The color had drained from Olivia's face. "What? I don't know anyone named Marcus. What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me." He'd thrown the screenshots at her, printed pages that Charlotte had helpfully prepared, scattered across the bed and floor like accusations. "I've seen everything. The messages, the affair, all of it. How long has this been going on? Is the baby even mine?" Olivia had picked up one of the pages with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the messages, and the confusion on her face had looked so genuine that for a moment he'd wavered. But Charlotte's voice had been in his head, warning him about manipulation, and he'd hardened his heart. "Ethan, I don't understand," Olivia had said, her voice cracking. "These messages, I never sent these. I've never heard of this person. Someone is setting me up. This isn't real." "They're from your phone," he'd shouted. "Your phone, Olivia. Stop lying to me." She'd fumbled for her phone, scrolling frantically through her messages. "They're not here. Ethan, these conversations aren't on my phone. Look." She'd held it out to him, but he'd refused to take it. "You deleted them. Of course you deleted them. Do you think I'm stupid?" The argument had spiraled from there, Olivia becoming increasingly frantic and Ethan becoming increasingly cold. She'd begged him to believe her, to check her location history, to call this mysterious Marcus person, to do anything to verify that she was telling the truth. But he'd already made up his mind, or rather, Charlotte had made it up for him. "I want a divorce," he'd said finally, the words like stones in his mouth. "And I want a paternity test as soon as the baby is born." Olivia had collapsed onto the bed, her body shaking with sobs, one hand protectively over her stomach. "Please, Ethan, please don't do this. I love you. I've never betrayed you. That baby is yours, only yours. Please, just listen to me." But he hadn't listened. He'd walked out of the room, out of the flat, and straight to Charlotte's place, where she'd been waiting with open arms and a bottle of whiskey and more poison dressed up as comfort. The divorce had been finalized 3 months later, a record time thanks to Marcus Henley's aggressive tactics and Charlotte's constant encouragement to rip off the bandage and not let her drag it out. Olivia had tried everything to stop it, had sent letters that Ethan never received because Charlotte collected the mail, had called from different numbers that Charlotte screened, had even shown up at his office only to be turned away by security at Charlotte's suggestion that he get a restraining order if she continued to harass him. Every avenue Olivia tried to reach him, Charlotte had already blocked, and she'd done it so seamlessly that Ethan never even knew his wife was fighting for their marriage. In those dark months, Ethan had moved into Charlotte's spare room, unable to face the flat that still smelled like Olivia's perfume, still held memories of their happiness in every corner. Charlotte had been there for everything, cooking his meals, making sure he ate, going with him to lawyer meetings, holding him when he broke down in the middle of the night. She'd quit her job as a software engineer, claiming she wanted to focus on supporting him through his crisis, and he'd been too destroyed to question it, too grateful for her presence to wonder why she seemed almost happy playing the role of his caretaker. The paternity test had been Charlotte's idea, brought up again and again until Ethan agreed to pursue it. "You need to know," she'd insisted. "For your own peace of mind, you need to know if that child is yours." But the test never happened because Charlotte had made sure the divorce was finalized before the baby was born, had convinced Ethan that he didn't want to be present for the birth of a child that might not be his, that seeing Olivia again would only cause more pain. So when their son was born on a cold December morning, Ethan hadn't been there, and by the time he might have pursued a paternity test, Charlotte had convinced him it was better to just move on, to start fresh, to let the past stay buried. It was 6 months after the divorce, when the lines between them had blurred in a way that could never be undone. Ethan had been drowning in guilt and grief and alcohol, and Charlotte had been there, always there, and one night boundaries had dissolved in a haze of whiskey and desperation and something toxic masquerading as comfort. He'd woken up the next morning in her bed, sick with self-loathing, and she'd been watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between satisfaction and sadness. They'd never spoken about it directly, had pretended it was a one-time mistake brought on by too much drinking and too much pain. But it had happened twice more over the following months, each time leaving Ethan feeling more hollow and wrong. He'd finally moved out, gotten his own place, started trying to rebuild some semblance of a life, but the damage had been done, and the guilt of what had happened with his sister had been another reason to never look back at his old life, to never try to find Olivia, to never wonder about the child who might have been his. Now, standing in this hospital room 7 years later, Ethan understood that even that had been part of Charlotte's design. By crossing that line with him, she'd created another layer of shame and guilt that made it impossible for him to ever go back, that made sure he'd bury the past so deep that the truth would never surface. Charlotte's confession continued in gasps and tears, the monitor beeping more erratically now, nurses having come in twice already to check on her. "After you moved out, I tried to find her," Charlotte said, her voice barely a whisper. "I told myself I'd make sure she was okay, that the baby was healthy, but really, I just wanted to make sure she stayed away from you. I found her once, saw her at a supermarket with a baby in a pram. Your son, Ethan. He had your eyes, your nose. There was no question he was yours." The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. Charlotte had known, had seen his son, and had said nothing. "She looked terrible," Charlotte continued. "Exhausted, thin, like she hadn't slept in months. She was struggling to pay, and I watched her count out coins for milk and nappies. I could have helped her. I could have given her money, could have told you the truth then, but I didn't. I walked away and convinced myself I'd done it for your own good, that you were better off without her." Ethan felt bile rise in his throat. While he'd been rebuilding his life, Olivia had been struggling alone with their child, and Charlotte had watched and done nothing. "She tried to contact you for years," Charlotte said. "Even after I thought she'd given up, I'd find letters. I'd intercepted, emails I'd deleted from your account because you gave me your passwords to help manage things after the divorce. The last one was about 2 years ago. She'd moved, changed her email, probably changed her phone number. I don't know where she is now." The machines around Charlotte started alarming more urgently now. A nurse rushed in, checked her vitals, and gave Ethan a look that said time was running out. "You need to find them," Charlotte gasped, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Find them, and tell them I'm sorry. Tell Olivia I'm sorry. Tell your son his father never abandoned him, that his father didn't know he existed, that it was all my fault. Promise me, Ethan. Promise me you'll find them." Ethan looked at his sister, this woman he'd loved and trusted his entire life, this woman who'd destroyed everything good in his life because of a twisted obsession she'd called love. He wanted to feel anger, wanted to rage at her, but all he felt was a vast, hollow emptiness and an overwhelming need to fix what she'd broken, even though he knew some things, once shattered, could never be made whole again. "I promise," he said, and Charlotte's face relaxed slightly, some of the tension leaving her body. "There's one more thing," she whispered, and Ethan leaned closer to hear. The name she gave him. I saw it on the birth certificate when I was stalking her social media years ago. She named him Noah, Noah James Parker. Your son's name is Noah. It was the middle name that broke him. James had been their father's name, the man who died when Ethan was 19. Olivia had given their son his father's name, had kept that connection even after Ethan had abandoned her, even when she'd had every reason to hate him. It was a gift he hadn't deserved and hadn't even known existed. Charlotte's eyes were closing now, her breathing becoming more labored. "I loved you so much it destroyed everything," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry." Then her hand went slack in his, and the steady beep of the monitor became a single, sustained tone, and Charlotte was gone, taking her guilt and her secrets and her twisted love with her into whatever came next. Ethan stood there as nurses rushed in, as they tried to revive her, as they finally called time of death at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning that felt like the end of one life and the terrifying beginning of another. He had a son, His name was Noah, and Ethan had absolutely no idea where to find him. The search consumed him in a way nothing else ever had. Ethan left the hospital that morning as the sun was rising, Charlotte's body being prepared for the morgue, and he went straight home to begin what felt like an impossible task. 7 years was a long time, and people could disappear completely in that span, especially if they wanted to. He started with the obvious places, searching social media for Olivia Parker, but she'd either deleted her accounts or changed her name, and there were thousands of women with similar names in the UK alone. He tried searching for Noah James Parker, but the child would only be 6, too young to have any significant online presence. He hired a private investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. And while she worked, Ethan went through everything he'd kept from his marriage, looking for clues he'd been too blind to see 7 years ago. He found old phone bills and called every number Olivia might have contacted, but most were disconnected or belonged to people who'd never heard of her. He tracked down her old workplace, but she'd left years ago, and they couldn't give him any information due to privacy laws. Her old friends, the few he could remember, either refused to speak to him or genuinely didn't know where she was. He was a ghost from her past, the man who'd abandoned her while pregnant, and no one was eager to help him find her again. It took Sarah Chen 3 weeks to find a lead: a forwarding address from an old utility bill, a breadcrumb trail through rental records and employment histories that led to a small town in Cornwall, about as far from London as one could get while staying in England. "She goes by Olivia Matthews now," Sarah told him, handing over a folder with an address, a workplace, and a photo that made Ethan's breath catch. It was Olivia, but not the Olivia he remembered. Her auburn hair was shorter now, cut into a practical bob, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, evidence of stress and struggle and years of being a single mother. But she was still beautiful, still her. And in the photo, she was laughing at something, her face tilted toward the sun, and Ethan felt 7 years of grief crash over him all at once. "There's a child in some of the surveillance photos," Sarah continued, flipping to another image. "Matches the age you mentioned. Noah Matthews, 6 years old, attends Meadowbrook Primary School." Ethan stared at the photo of his son. Noah had his dark hair and Olivia's green eyes, and he was grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile that looked so much like Ethan's own childhood photos that it hurt. This was his child, his son, and he'd missed 6 years of his life because of Charlotte's lies. The drive to Cornwall took 4 hours. 4 hours of Ethan rehearsing and discarding dozens of different speeches, trying to find words that could possibly explain or excuse what he'd done, knowing that no words existed that could make this right. He arrived in the small coastal town just as schools were letting out, and he sat in his car outside Meadowbrook Primary, his heart hammering, watching as parents collected their children. Then he saw them. Olivia was walking toward the school gates, wearing jeans and a blue jumper, her hair blowing in the sea breeze, and next to her, holding her hand, was Noah. The boy was chattering away about something, animated and happy, and Olivia was smiling down at him with such pure love that Ethan felt like an intruder just watching them. They collected Noah from where he was waiting with a teacher, and Ethan watched as his son launched into what was clearly a detailed explanation of his day, his hands gesturing wildly while Olivia listened with patient attention. They turned to walk home, and Ethan knew this was his moment. He could let them walk away, let them keep the peace they'd built without him, or he could step into their lives and risk destroying it all over again. He got out of the car. "Olivia," he called, and the sound of his voice made her freeze mid-step. She turned slowly, and when her eyes met his, he saw shock, then fear, then something that looked like anger, all flashing across her face in rapid succession. Noah looked up at her, confused, then looked at Ethan with open curiosity. "Who's that, Mum?" the boy asked, and the casual way he said "Mum" in his small voice made Ethan's eyes burn with tears. Olivia's hand tightened on Noah's shoulder, protective and defensive. "Go wait by the gate, sweetheart," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off Ethan. "But Mum—" "Now, Noah." Something in her tone made the boy obey, though he kept looking back at them as he walked slowly toward the school gates. Once he was out of earshot, Olivia walked toward Ethan, and he could see she was trembling, whether from anger or fear or shock. He couldn't tell. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here," she said, her voice low and shaking. "After 7 years, after everything, you just appear out of nowhere?" "Olivia, I know you have no reason to listen to me," Ethan began, the speech he'd prepared dissolving in the face of her anger. "But I need to tell you something. Charlotte, my sister, she died 3 days ago, and before she died, she told me the truth. About the messages, about Marcus, about everything. She made it all up. She faked everything to break us apart." He watched the emotions play across Olivia's face, watched her process what he was saying. "I know," she said finally, and it was the last thing he'd expected to hear. "You know?" She laughed bitterly. "I figured it out about a year after the divorce. I'd been trying to understand what happened, obsessively going over everything, and I realized the timeline of when Charlotte had convinced me to get a new phone and when the messages supposedly started. I tried to tell you, sent you letters, emails, even hired a lawyer to try to reopen the case. But I never heard back. Eventually, I realized you didn't want to know the truth. You'd rather believe I'd betrayed you than admit your sister was capable of that kind of manipulation." Ethan felt the words like physical blows. "I never got your letters. Charlotte intercepted everything. I didn't know, Olivia. I swear I didn't know. And that's supposed to make it better?" Tears were streaming down her face now. "You gave up so easily, Ethan. You didn't fight for me, for us, for our family. You believed the worst of me without question, and when I was pregnant and alone and terrified, you were nowhere to be found. Do you know what that did to me? Do you have any idea what it was like raising our son alone, telling him his father didn't want him?" "The baby was mine," Ethan said, his own tears flowing freely now. "Charlotte told me before she died. Noah is my son." "I've been telling you that for 7 years," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "Why does it only matter now because your dead sister confirmed it?" She was right. She was absolutely right, and Ethan had no defense, no excuse. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing how inadequate the words were. "I'm so sorry, Olivia. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I destroyed everything. But please, please let me meet my son. Let me try to be a father to him. I'll do whatever you want. Pay whatever support you need. I'll stay out of your life if that's what you want. But please don't keep me from knowing my child." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. 7 years of pain and anger and exhaustion fighting against something else. Something that might have been the ghost of the love they'd once shared. Finally, she turned and called out, "Noah, come here, please." The boy ran over, and up close, the resemblance was even more striking. He had Ethan's nose, his chin, his father's eyes looking out from a child's face. "Noah, this is Ethan," Olivia said carefully. He's your father." Noah looked up at Ethan with those familiar eyes, and there was no recognition there, no joy, just confused wariness. "I thought I didn't have a father," he said to Olivia, not to Ethan. "Mummy, I'm confused." "I know, baby," Olivia said, pulling him close. "It's complicated, but Ethan would like to get to know you if you want that. You don't have to decide right now." Noah looked at Ethan again, studying him. "Did you not want me?" the boy asked, and the question shattered what was left of Ethan's heart. "I wanted you," Ethan said, kneeling down to be at Noah's level. "I wanted you so much. I made a terrible mistake and I'm so sorry. I'd like a chance to know you if you'll let me." Noah thought about this, then looked up at his mother. "Is he going to leave again?" Olivia's expression crumbled, and she looked at Ethan with a mixture of pain and something that might have been hope. That's up to him. Ethan looked at his son, at the woman he'd loved and lost, at the family he'd thrown away, and made the only promise he knew he could keep. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not ever again." Whether that would be enough, whether trust could be rebuilt from ashes, whether love could grow again in soil poisoned by betrayal and lies, none of them knew. But as the sun set over that small coastal town, 3 people stood together at the beginning of something uncertain and terrifying, and maybe, just maybe, worth fighting for. The goodbye gift Charlotte had left him wasn't forgiveness or redemption. It was the truth and a chance, and the knowledge that some mistakes can never be fully undone, only lived with and learned from, and slowly, painfully healed. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. Wow, friends, that was quite a story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did sharing it with you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Grace Time with Auntie for more amazing stories. I can't wait to see you all in the next one. Take care and stay happy.